Disney Gallery show, Star Wars The Mandalorian, which, of course, is the behind-the-scenes show where they're talking about all the fun and interesting ways that they actually create the show The Mandalorian on Disney+. This episode was called Process. So this is an interesting episode. My kind of overview of it is that I was surprised at kind of some of the ways that they're creating, because they mostly focused on sort of visualization, like how they're kind of, you know, putting it together. Of course, it's called Process, but I was surprised at how much they're using sort of that Unreal game engine, which always reminds me of Red versus Blue. If anyone ever remembers watching Red versus Blue, where they would take basically video game footage and they would make stories out of it, you know, and all kinds of places used to do that. I mean, that was like a big thing for a little while. But it's interesting to me how they're, you know, again, taking some of that previs technology that they developed actually for Lion King, and they're actually using that to help craft the storytelling and help see what all the kind of assets and everything they're going to need in order to create The Mandalorian. So I found this episode particularly interesting. I can't recommend watching this enough, but that's my kind of general overview. What did you think of it, Eric?
Yeah, by the way, the visualization, I did want to make a clarification. I had said that the title of this episode was Visualization last week, and that's how it's listed on IMDb. And I don't know where the disconnect is, why they improperly labeled it. I'm guessing maybe that's what it was called originally, because it would make sense to call it Visualization. But instead, the actual title of the episode is Process. You mentioned some of the interesting stuff. Of course, we were introduced to the game engine technology in a previous episode. I think that was the episode Technology. They talked about the use of the game engine, but they got a little bit more into it, and especially this the Visual Pro, I think is what they called it.
Yes,
that was the main focus of this particular episode, and it was fascinating. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. It's really interesting to see how they put this thing together, because there are so many different elements, in particular with the back screen that they use, so that they're not really doing as much green screen. They're still doing some green screen, but not a lot. And then they're not doing location shooting. They're still filming within a studio, but they're using that incredible back screen technology while they're filming this. So it was pretty interesting. Overall, I mean, I've been enjoying these episodes. Particularly, I thought it picked up with like episode 3 with the stuff that I was really, really interested in. Not that I didn't like the previous two, Directing and Legacy. They had some good highlights as well. But I've really been getting into this new technology that they're using to make these shows. It's really fascinating to kind of see that process and what they're doing, because a lot of this stuff really seems to me to be game changing, just because, not so much because it's like they've invented all these new things, but because they've taken so many things that already existed, but they've incorporated them together in a way that's really unique and special, and I think will have big implications for both the television and film industries, you know, in years to come.
And that's the thing that's interesting too, is like you said, it's not that it's necessarily all totally brand new stuff. Some of it is, but it's the way that they're using a lot of stuff that's actually been around for quite some time, or they're using it in a totally new way. Yeah, it's really interesting. It was very, very interesting. But I was kind of shocked. I'm surprised at how much of this sort of game engine sort of method that they're using. It kind of flies in the face of what I was originally thinking. When I was originally thinking about, as we were getting into this, and I first started reading, and of course I brought it up here on the show, how they were using what we now know is called the volume, which was basically sort of that wraparound video wall. When those first stories first came out, I thought they were doing some really interesting things with sort of old school methods, but with kind of new technology, you know, doing the old back screen projection type tricks and whatever, like that you would have seen in a lot of those, you know, older movies, like from you know, sort of like the 50s or even going back to the 40s, where you see someone driving the car. I brought this up before. Someone's driving the car and there's a kind of a movie playing in the background. And I thought that was mostly what they were doing with this. However, it turns out that's not actually it is sort of, but it's actually totally brand new ways that they're using a lot of current technology. So it really flew in the face of what I thought, you know, we were going to be seeing. And it doesn't dispel my own personal ideas for interesting ways I think that you could kind of take what they're doing and do it on a more of an independent level. And we'll see how well those executions work out in probably the next several years, because I have some ideas for some things I want to try, and we'll see how they work. Kind of spitballing off of sort of what I thought they were doing versus what they're actually doing. What they're actually doing is very high tech. I would imagine it's very expensive. So while it's all terribly interesting, I don't see myself being able to, you know, kind of borrow as many ideas from them as I originally was kind of secretly hoping I would be able to. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And it's very cool to see how they're crafting and sort of putting the Mandalorian together.
Yeah, well, one of the things I thought was really interesting is, of course, they're using sort of this, like you said, this game engine technology. And they're basically doing, like, you know, what normally would be done, I think, primarily through concept art. They're basically setting up the scenes before they film them, and they basically have everything sort of fully rendered within this game engine, and it's not just the backgrounds. You know, it's they have every single shot basically already set up months in advance before the director actually starts interacting with the actors and the actual set, or as they call it, the volume. They already know exactly where they're going to do all this, and it's amazing to me that they're able to do that. And of course, one of the things that they incorporate into that is the motion capture technology. They actually have the stunt coordinators come out so that they can get those realistic movements, and they know exactly the kind of spacing that they need, and they can then create all this virtually before they build the actual sets. And they've got like every single angle and where the actor's supposed to be, you know, completely done in this sort of virtual environment, this game and engine environment, before they ever shoot an actual scene with the actors. It's amazing to me that they're able to do that, because, you know, they showed a lot of these images, the side by side, or they would show the previs, the pre-visual, and using that technology, and then show the actual ending scene, and they're almost like spot on. You know what I mean? As far as like almost just movement for movement, you know, frame by frame, almost exactly the same. It's really incredible. You know what I mean? The fact that they're able to do that, because, you know, you could imagine using a game engine, like, let's say something like, I know there was I think like years and years ago, there was like this movie maker that was using kind of like the Sims type of technology so that you could create little movies. And of course, that stuff can be really helpful, especially when you're trying to sort of basically just do sort of the different, you're trying to set up the different frames of your movie, right? You're trying to, it can be a very useful tool to have something like that, where you can kind of move the characters around, you can kind of construct these virtual sets and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like having a dollhouse, right? And but it's all virtual. It's all within a sort of a game environment. You can move everything around like a little dollhouse, and you can kind of decide, okay, so we want to do this, and we want to have sort of a long shot and a medium shot and a close up here. We want this character to be standing here and all that stuff. But it's not. It's just an approximation. It just kind of gives you an idea of what it is that you're going to be doing, so that you're more prepared when you actually shoot. You know, that's the part of the whole filmmaking process, is doing something like that. Because if you don't, it can be a real mess when you actually show up on location, whether it's in the studio or on an actual location somewhere, to get that stuff done. It can become a real mess, and you're just sort of running and gunning. But in this situation, I mean, they had like everything down before they ever start filming. It's just amazing. It's like the director basically has decided every shot, and of course, part of that I think, well, from the episode, I know it has to do with that back screen again, because they have to make sure that everybody can interact properly with the back screen. And then of course we talked about before that camera, when it moves, the background moves. You know what I mean? So the camera knows where it is within the environment, so that when it moves, the background moves, and it's seamless. It's crazy. You know what I mean? All the different things that are going on at the same time.
It is. It is crazy cool, and it's strange to think about this. But basically, on someone's hard drive, essentially, are almost sort of like, CGI animated cartoons of essentially the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
With all its previs and basically almost the whole friggin' episode, like kind of put together. It makes you wonder.
It is the whole episode.
Yeah.
I mean, they said, like, traditionally they were talking about that traditionally when you use that previs technology, you just kind of set up a couple shots. You know what I mean? Just kind of use it the way that you would, use, concept artists and things like that, where you're just setting up different shots and saying, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. No, they said that every single shot was completely pre-rendered before they ever picked up the real camera and started filming with an actor. So literally there's like an entire animated version. Like you said, there's an entire animated version of every single one of these episodes.
It makes me wonder if at any point, the Mandalorian exists on Disney Plus, one, and then number two, physical media. I don't think physical media is ever going to truly totally go away, but it's not in vogue at the moment. But it makes you wonder, like even certain, like for example, like even CBS All Access released like Blu-ray versions of the different seasons of Discovery, and it makes me wonder if they might actually include one or two of these if they were to ever to release the Mandalorian like in a Blu-ray set with like the Disney Gallery featurettes. If they might have one or two of these episodes, because that would be, especially the more action filled ones, would be really kind of fun to be able to see all the previs and how it kind of looked before they actually started filming. I'd be really curious to see that.
I was totally thinking along the same lines. It's like they've got to do it when they come out with the home release of this, which they will. I believe they absolutely will come out with both a DVD version and a Blu-ray version of this, and there'll be some sort of a special edition. And I was thinking it would be just put all of them in there. Why not? They already got it. But, put every episode in there and basically have these animated versions of the Mandalorian. I actually have an article here so we can kind of show some of the type of the footage. They actually did a lot of extensive commentary on this particular scene, which is when they do the rescue on the prison barge. And they talked about that because that did involve a lot of motion capture as well, where they had the stunt coordinators, the stunt people choreograph this fight so they knew, the physics, because that's also really important, right? Because, game engines have their own kind of physics that's not real. So the only way to get the real physics is to have people, actually go through and block all the scenes and show the way that they're actually going to interact, in this, real environment, because when they work in the volume, it is a real set, right? So I have this image here from one of those scenes, and they have a couple other images here, including about some of the concept art and stuff like that. But look at that; that's such a cool image of the Mandalorian himself. And I mean, it's like, granted, you can see that it's a little rough, but it's still like just amazing that this is only really being used to basically set up the shots for the final scene, and it's like they have this for everything, for every single episode, all the different shots, the entire narrative. By the way, here's some cool concept art too, and that they also showed in the episode. when they were first sort of putting these scenes together. I remember, I think Filoni was actually talking about some of this stuff specifically. So they did actually show some of the very rough concept art, the stuff that this is sort of the traditional kind of thing that you see when they're setting up different shots for a movie or television show. They do stuff like this, so you can kind of see, okay, so we're going to have a shot of a close up of Baby Yoda. We're going to have like a shot of like the IG-11 and the Mandalorian. You know what I mean? And go back and forth. This is the kind of traditional stuff that you normally see when they're setting that all up and deciding how they're going to shoot this thing. And then you have this, where it's basically just a fully rendered scene where they have everything happening, everything going on. I mean, everything that happened in the live action version happened in this previs.
Yes, it's really cool. And when they were talking about the process, I thought that we definitely delve into the concept art side of it for sure, because they have all those beautiful, concept art pieces that they play at the end credits. And now it kind of makes sense why they have so much of that stuff actually available, because if you figure that they're using that in order to help put together, the assets that they need so they can do this sort of, animatic, which it's beyond an animatic, but sort of these, roughly animated, basically, sort of gameplay footage episodes, essentially. It makes sense when they have all those beautifully rendered pieces and when they have so much of it, because on the front end, they're doing as much visualization they can on the concept stage, so they know exactly what they're going to need to actually build in order to create their virtual world, so they can get the cameras in there and then get their digital, stunt doubles and stand-ins and put them all in and, basically go through the process of crafting these episodes virtually and figuring out what other additional things that they might need. They're doing all their blocking. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy, friggin' crazy. So this is a very, very interesting episode, for sure. And I'll be honest with you, I think people that are interested in not just storytelling or obviously, filmmaking, but I think people that are interested just in gaming, people that are interested just in the idea of creating art or just kind of sci-fi storytelling experiences. All this stuff is just really, really interesting. And I think could inspire people to do kind of unique, fun things that maybe they hadn't really thought about before. But yes, very, very cool. This was a really interesting episode of the gallery here for The Mandalorian.
There was another thing at the beginning of the episode that we didn't cover that I thought was really, really interesting, talking about process specifically and the way that Favreau kind of approached the making of The Mandalorian that I thought was really interesting. And a lot of this stuff has been sort of discussed, but it's neat to actually see Favreau kind of say directly, yeah, this is where I was coming from. Because what he mentioned was he didn't just look at the Star Wars trilogy. Favreau is obviously a great student of film. You can see that. And he's obviously a huge, super Lucas fan, George Lucas fan. I've been using the term Lucas loyalist. And he definitely, that comes through so much, because what he said was, as much as they're kind of basing this like on the original trilogy, he actually was like, well, what did George Lucas base the original trilogy on? And so he was looking at these samurai movies and he was looking at these Westerns that he knew that George Lucas had actually based Star Wars on. And he said, I'm going to base The Mandalorian on that. And it's such a neat and different approach. And you can see it. You can see it. I've made this point, and I know in some ways I probably sound like a broken record, but I just can't make this point enough. They talked about in the previous episode how they knew about the influence of the Battle of Britain film, that George Lucas had basically, because he had seen the Battle of Britain, which was filmed with real airplanes, with actual aerial photography. It wasn't models. Obviously, there was no CGI. It wasn't anything like that. They actually filmed these planes in the sky. And I always say that comes through very well in the combat in the original trilogy, especially on the first Death Star run. You really feel like this is like, like rooted in World War II, dogfighting combat footage, as opposed to like the Disney trilogy, where a lot of it just seems incredibly hollow, and it seems like it's based on Star Wars. It seems like it's based on Star Wars. It's not based on actual real combat. And Favreau, of course, is like, he's not like that. He's like, I'm not just basing this on the original trilogy. I'm going to the stuff that George Lucas was looking at, like the Seven Samurai, right, and things like that. And I'm looking at these westerns and stuff like that, and I'm going to base my little version of Star Wars here on that stuff, the stuff that George Lucas himself was basing the original trilogy on, which I thought was really cool.
Yes, and it's interesting too, because it's kind of a flip when you think about it, because previously what we've been doing is they use storyboards and sort of rough animatics in order to help visualize the world, and then they would film it, and then sort of the CGI sometimes is meant to sort of kind of stand in and help kind of bring the rest of the reality, right? When you talk about like some of the special effects, when you talk about some of the vehicle effects, when you talk about the world building in previous productions, and not just for Star Wars, but for lots of things. But the crazy thing about this is it's almost not backwards, because it's not fully finished, but it's interesting how they're using sort of this CGI in order to figure out how to better kind of visualize and ground the world, you know what I mean, to make sure that it works and it feels kind of real, and talked about the physics figure. It's interesting because it feels like a flip. Instead of visualizing it with drawing and painting and whatever, and then going out and then filming and then trying to bring a little bit more reality and fill in the world with CGI, it feels like we're kind of doing it differently. We're using the CGI to kind of help visualize it and try to make sure that it feels grounded and it feels real, by looking at real things. And then they turn around and they film it. It's such a completely different. I mean, you tell if I'm crazy, but it feels like we're just taking that concept and just kind of flipping it on its head. I don't know. It's very interesting.
It is. It really is. And I think a lot of that, like I mentioned, has to do with the camera positioning and stuff like that. Like the way they do it, they kind of have to do it that way. Like they can't do it any other way, because otherwise the camera wouldn't really know where it was. That's why they have to, like, everything just has to be, so right. Meticulous, I did want to acknowledge Orville Nation again. Hey, PJ, we're glad to see you. He says, hey, Retro Rogues. And he also mentions Lucas loyalist is a very accurate term. And I do want to mention, because I've been pretty consistent, and I have to say it again, I don't know why Kathleen Kennedy is in this show. She doesn't contribute anything to it, and I just don't get it. So, because do you think she contributed some great insight, Dave, for the? I think she only even had one line in this particular episode. I'm like, why are you there? Why are you there?
I don't know. I don't know. But I did think this was interesting. So just talking about art and talking about Star Wars. Most people never get the chance to actually see my desk I work on and all the crazy little things that I have sitting around to actually provide inspiration. But I thought this was kind of cool as we're talking about Star Wars and talking about art. When I was a kid, my mom used to get me a lot of Star Wars stuff, and this is actually, if you can, I'm trying to find the best way you can see it. This is a playing card from the Star Wars board game. If anyone actually remembers that,
we had it growing up.
So it's from 1977, but it's interesting. But that's artwork of Obi-Wan Kenobi deactivating the tractor beam. This is the only thing I have left from this board game, but I've always liked this drawing of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it's got kind of a previs art kind of style, and I've always loved it. And it actually sits right here to help provide inspiration when I'm working. So
no, that's the one they remade, right? That comes with the Tarkin action figure now.
Yes,
is that the same one?
Yeah.
That's, I think, the only way you can get that Tarkin figure is you have to buy the game. You know what I mean? Which is a reprint of that original. We used to play it all the time.
Yeah,
when I was a kid.
Yeah, my mom and I, we played it all the time too. I'd say that and Uno were the things that we played the most. So,
but it's funny. My mom used to really like that too, and she's not like a big sci-fi person. And even though she was kind of forced to watch the Star Wars movies, because of my dad and and me and my brother. She used to play that game with us all the time. We had like family game nights and stuff like that. It's a cool game. And as far as I know, it's still I think it's still available at Target. I think it wasn't a Target exclusive. I think it's still the reprint is still available at Target, and you get that Tarkin action figure with it.
That one, and then I remember the one we tried to play a lot, but we found really frustrating was the Star Trek the Motion Picture game, because I loved it because they had those little plastic little Enterprise. I don't have any of those left though because I cut the base off of them because they always bothered me that they had little bases, and then I would play with them actually as if they were toys. And so I did all the pieces, and the game was friggin' almost impossible to play anyway. So yeah, it's fine. But the Star Wars game,
I never had that one, but we've got some love in the Rogues Gallery for it. My friend Matt from Portronics Film Productions, he says that's awesome. I remember, so he used to play it as well. And then Jonas 1977 says, laugh out loud. I owned it for years. And Matt from Portronics says, I've got a bunch of Star Wars collectibles if anyone is interested, because I know Matt has actually been looking at getting rid of some of his stuff, but I actually have a ton of stuff as well. I don't think I still have the board game. I don't know if we still have that somewhere, like at my parents' house or something like that, but we had a lot of fun with that one.
That's all I have left of it. Is I managed to hold on to this one card. And I'm a big fan of Sergio Tappe, which is it's a very particular kind of style of sort of art and comic art and illustration, and I always felt like that this card had his influence all over it. And then so I decided it's kind of cool, but it still sits here providing inspiration ever since I was a kid. So there's not a whole lot of things I have left. I do have my die-cast Millennium Falcon, which sits back there. I have a little Darth Vader that came with those weird they're like little metal die-cast figures, and they had like the little environments that you put them together. I still have a Darth Vader with his lightsaber, and then I still have my Boba Fett. I still have my original Boba Fett from when I was a kid. I still have that one too, and that's about all I've got still left from when I was a child. That's original Star Wars. So,
yeah, I think I have quite a bit actually in boxes. That's the problem with me, is a lot of the stuff is in boxes. I just don't have any place to display anything. So half of this stuff I don't even know what I have between myself and my brother. I know a lot of the stuff is actually here now, but it's in boxes, and I don't even know what we have anymore. So I had quite an extensive Star Wars collection. I still do. I actually have a lot of Episode 1 stuff. I have a ton of Episode 1 stuff, which is kind of silly, and it's all worthless. You know what I mean? So
I think the one thing I've had that I've shown on the show before that sits here that I think is really kind of fun is I've got that what do they call it, the Black Series concept Boba Fett. This guy, he sits on my desk too, and he's really cool. And it's crazy.
Is very cool.
Because you could take like his blaster out of the holster. It's just really crazy cool. And then my brother actually got this for me. But this guy sits on my desk. He actually hangs out with Star-Lord and Rocket, and they sit here on my desk. So anyhow,
that's very cool. That's obviously, I think for anybody who doesn't know, that Black Series, some of that stuff is really high quality. It's really obviously meant for sort of the collector's market.
It is. It's really cool. And I've been a big Boba Fett fan ever since I was a kid. I used to always be horrified. I had a really good friend of mine who actually passed away earlier this year, actually. And his Boba Fett figure, he was like a big wrestling fan, and they didn't make a lot of wrestling figures for a long time. And it was a local wrestler who some people might know from the WWE back in the day, which was Jerry the King Lawler. And Boba Fett was always Jerry the King Lawler, and I always found that horrifying, completely horrifying. But he was just big into wrestling, and that's what he had. So whenever we would play, I'd be like, okay, that's not that anymore. and we had known that there had been rumors that Boba Fett was the original clone trooper. So when we used to play Star Wars, that was kind of the idea, is that, you know, mine was the real Boba Fett, and then his, you know, was occasionally sort of like a clone trooper that just, you know, was left over from the original wars.
Right.
So yeah. Anyhow.
Well, Matt from Portronic says that's great inspiration, and I think he means that Boba Fett that Boba Fett figure, because that is highly detailed. And then Chris Roberts clarified that's me on YouTube, the Jonas 77. I happen to be on YouTube when I saw you guys were on. So Chris, we appreciate you coming back and switching platforms and giving some love to both platforms. We like that as well. So because we are on multiple platforms, we do a multi-stream every Wednesday, obviously. So we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitch, and we're on Twitter. So, you know, if you've got to be able to find us on one of those, you know what I mean? So we're definitely on multiple platforms. We appreciate that love to the multiple platforms.
Right. And I was going to make this stupid joke about don't use the Facebook to Twitch or Twitter on YouTube, but I won't do that.
You won't do that, huh?
I won't do that. Doesn't make any sense anyway. So is that so I think we're all in agreement. Like, if you have Disney Plus, definitely check out the Disney Gallery of Mandalorian. All the episodes are really cool. The last few that primarily been dealing with sort of how they're crafting and putting the episodes together are very, very interesting. And I do think it's sort of not only technology, but uses of technology that we're going to see kind of permeate, you know, the filmmaking industry for years to come. Just in the same way that Lucasfilm has always sort of set the tempo and set the tone, you know, for big budget, you know, films that involve a lot of special effects and all that kind of stuff. I think we're just going to continue to see it proliferate. It'll be interesting to see when they actually start maybe using this technology to do sort of real world applications, you know, things like Titanic and whatever, where they start trying to use this volume thing to actually simulate, you know, not a science fiction world, but maybe more of a historically accurate, you know, kind of, you know, world. I wonder what kind of interesting things they're going to be able to do with that. There's got to be some, I mean, I imagine there's got to be all kinds of crazy cool applications for that. So.
No, you could literally use it for anything. I mean, the only limit is your imagination, really. Once you have all these different elements set up, but as you mentioned, it would be quite expensive. You know what I mean? It would. It'll take some time before that kind of stuff filters down to the independent creator. But there's definitely some ideas you can take from this, and definitely some things that you can play around with. There's no doubt about that. I did want to mention there's 2 other episodes left. The next episode will be Score. And the score of The Mandalorian is a little bit controversial. There are some detractors of the score. I don't think Dave and I are among them, but there are some people that don't like the score of The Mandalorian at all. So it'll be interesting. That'll be an interesting episode. And then the last one is sort of vaguely titled Connections. So the last episode will be interesting to see what that actually means, you know, as far as connections. But yeah, the next episode is going to be about score. So we'll be talking about music, Dave. We'll be talking about the music of The Mandalorian, which I said is not without controversy. There are some hardcore fans that absolutely hate the Mandalorian score.
Well, and I wish there was the way that we could actually play some of the music without any sort of negative connotations, not just to profiteer from it or anything weird like that, but just in order to just be able to better discuss it. But every time that we put any music of any kind in anything, we get flagged and copyright.
No, music flags you like nothing else. Nothing else. My very first YouTube copyright flag was one of the first videos I ever did. It was game footage from Star Wars Battlefront. The not the original, but the original one for the PlayStation 4, the original modern one.
Yeah.
Because that's confusing because there's 2 Battlefront games, 2 Star Wars Battlefront games. They didn't change the name at all. So the more modern one, I did some game footage just to test it. And of course it had some Star Wars music. It was flagged immediately. I mean, it's the first time I got flagged. I was like, what's going on? Now, music will get you flagged like nothing else, you know?
And it's sad too, because I would love to talk about some of these amazing releases coming out, for example, from La La Land Records. La La Land Records, for those people who are not familiar, is one of the really great places you can go to actually really great orchestral, movie soundtracks. They do limited releases. They do all kinds of really awesome stuff. And I get regular updates from them, news items and stuff like that. And I'd love to be able to cover it and talk about it on the show. But I'd like to actually be able to play some of the music samples they make available. But we just can't do anything with music.